In Victorian England, saying yes to marriage meant you could never again eat fish with a knife or sit with your back to a window, and if you broke any of these invisible rules, society would literally erase you. One mistopone wrong glove colour or improper greeting, and doors slammed shut forever. People stopped seeing you. Invitations disappeared. And in a world where social connections were survival, this was essentially a death sentence. So yeah, if these stories help you sleep, hit subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment your location and time. Sometimes I see someone from California listening at 3 p.m. and I'm like, are you napping? All right, let's head back to Victorian England. But first, get comfortable. I mean it. Adjust your pillows, grab that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. The darkness gradually recedes as weak morning light filters through heavy damask curtains. Your eyes flutter open to an elaborately papered ceiling, the subtle floral pattern barely visible in the dim light. This is London, 1863, and you're the eldest daughter of an aristocratic family. The first thing you notice isn't the light, it's the chill. Your bedroom, despite being in one of the wealthiest homes in Mayfair, is absolutely freezing. Unlike your warm, temperature-controlled bedroom right now, Victorian houses were iceboxes. Even the rich couldn't escape winter's bite. Coal fires provided the only heat, and they burned out overnight. So that first moment of consciousness, pure shivering misery. You don't move yet. You can't. In wealthy Victorian households, propriety demanded you wait for your lady's maid to enter and begin your day. Moving before then would be, well, no proper lady would even consider it. I spent months reading Victorian women's private diaries just to understand their morning routines. The level of rigid formality would drive most of us insane, but for them, just Tuesday. A soft knock at the door and your lady's maid enters carrying a porcelain basin of lukewarm water. You're lucky in middle-class homes they'd be using yesterday's bathwater reheated with a hot brick tossed in. The rich at least got fresh water. "Good morning, miss," she says softly, setting down the basin and immediately moving to draw back the curtains. It's 7:30. Lady Montgomery's tea is this afternoon. Those words send a jolt through you stronger than any cup of coffee. Lady Montgomery's tea, one of the most important social events of the week. Your mother has been strategizing for this for days. "Jane," you call to your maid, trying to hide the anxiety in your voice, "the blue dress or the green for today?" The maid pauses, and you can see her carefully considering her response. She's 23, only 2 years older than you, but the calluses on her hands and the careful way she carries herself make her seem decades your senior. "The blue, miss," she says finally. "Lady Montgomery mentioned last week that green reminds her of illness." And there it is. One wrong colour choice could derail not just your afternoon, but potentially an entire matrimonial plan. Because that's what these social visits were really about, the carefully choreographed marriage market. Speaking of choreographed dances, getting dressed as a Victorian woman of means was basically an Olympic sport. You're about to witness the daily torture session. First, the thin cotton chemise goes on over your head. Next, the knee-length drawsieres. Victorian underwear was more like shorts, open at the crotch for bathroom needs. Just imagine the logistics of that with all the other layers. Not fun. Then comes the first instrument of torture, the corset. Your maid positions it around your torso and you grab the bedpost, bracing yourself. She begins to pull the laces. Picture this, your lungs being compressed by whalebone and cording, your ribs forced inward, your spine realigning. The Victorian ideal waist was 18 inches, physically impossible for most women without severe corseting. You take quick, shallow breaths as each tug makes the corset tighter. "A bit more, miss?" Jane asks, knowing that today's social call demands perfection. Yes, you gasp, though your body screams no. Lady Montgomery will notice if I'm not properly cinched. The blood rushes to your face as the corset tightens further. Many Victorian women regularly fainted from this practice. It wasn't delicate sensibilities, it was literal oxygen deprivation. Some developed deformed ribs and displaced organs, all for the sake of a socially acceptable silhouette. You know what's wild? There are medical textbooks from this era showing how corseting literally rearranged women's internal organs. I've seen the illustrations. Livers pushed up, intestines compressed, ribs permanently bent. The things we do for fashion, right? After the corset comes the cage crinolinea contraption of steel hoops that expands your skirt outward in that classic Victorian bell shape. It weighs about 7 pounds all on its own. Then the petticoats for warmth and volume, followed by the dress itself. When fully dressed, a Victorian woman carried around 15-20 pounds of clothing every single day. Once dressed, you sit at your vanity while Jane styles your hair no easy feat considering Victorian women rarely cut their hair. Many had locks reaching their knees. The weight could cause headaches and neck pain, but cutting it was considered scandalous. The ideal Victorian woman was basically half human, half upholstery padded, draped and pinned into submission. As Jane pins the last strands into place, you notice her hands are raw and cracked. This isn't surprising. She woke up at 4:30 this morning, started the fires, helped the cook prepare breakfast, polished silver, and still had to appear perfectly presentable to wake you. She'll work until after you go to bed tonight, around 18 hours total, and earn about $16 per year. That's roughly $100 to $800 in today's money for what amounts to constant labour. Okay, so you're dressed, your hair is done, your face has been washed with rose water. Makeup is for prostitutes and actresses, according to Victorian morality, though many women secretly used it anyway. Now it's time to descend for breakfast. The hallways of your home are silent as you make your way downstairs. Despite having 14 servants, good service meant invisible service. They've been trained to disappear when family members pass, stepping into doorways or servant passages, eyes downcast. If you saw them, they weren't doing their job correctly. Hold up, let me tell you something crazy about Victorian homes. They were literally designed to hide servants. Houses had separate staircases, corridors, and even entrances so that family members wouldn't have to witness the actual work that maintained their lifestyle. Out of sight, out of mind. It's like having your Amazon packages magically appear without ever seeing the delivery person. At breakfast, your father sits at the head of the table, already dressed in his morning coat, reading The Times. Your mother occupies the other end, while your two younger sisters sit across from you. The table is laden with dishes eggs, kippers, toast, coddled eggs, ham and preserves. The Victorians were serious about breakfast. "Good morning, father," you say with a small curtsy, yes, even to your own parents, formality was maintained. He glances up briefly. "Good morning, Eleanor. I trust you slept well." It's not really a question, so you simply nod and take your seat. A footman appears silently at your elbow to serve you tea. You're careful not to thank him directly. Acknowledging servants too personally was considered inappropriate. Instead, you give a slight nod. The rules around servants were absurdly complex. You weren't supposed to thank them for doing their job, but ignoring them completely was rude. You were expected to know everyone's name, but rarely use it. You should notice if they did something exceptional, but never draw attention to mistakes. Breakfast conversation is minimal and subdued. Victorian etiquette dictated that mornings were not for lively discussion. Your father occasionally comments on news from the paper. Your mother reminds everyone about Lady Montgomery's tea. Eleanor, she says, folding her napkin just so, remember that Lady Montgomery's niece will be there today. She's recently engaged to Viscount Harwick's son. Do make a point to congratulate her, though of course not before Lady Montgomery has acknowledged the engagement herself. This is the kind of social minefield you navigate daily. If you congratulate the niece too early, you seem presumptuous. Too late, and you appear rude or jealous. Every interaction has rules within rules. In your head, you're screaming, "How am I supposed to remember all this?" But outwardly, you simply nod and say, "Yes, mother." After breakfast, your morning is filled with appropriate activities for a young lady. Some needlework, which you hate but must excel at. Piano practice, at which you're mediocre, though no one would dare say so, and a French lesson with your sisters. The whole time your stomach is knotted with anxiety about the afternoon tea, because here's the brutal truth of Victorian upper-class women's lives. Social interactions weren't just pleasantries, they were survival. Your entire future depended on making the right impressions. Securing the right marriage, maintaining the right connections. Meanwhile, 3 floors below and 5 hours earlier, the day had already begun for those who made your life of leisure possible. Let me paint this picture for you. It's 4:30 a.m. The scullery maid, Mary, just 13 years old, wakes on her thin mattress in the attic. The space's freezing servants' quarters weren't heated. Her hands are chapped and bleeding from washing dishes in lye soap and scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. She has exactly 3 minutes to dress before she needs to be downstairs lighting fires. No time to wash, that's a once-weekly luxury for someone of her station. Her dress is damp from washing it the night before. Her one pair of shoes has holes, but she has to move quickly or face the housekeeper's wrath. By the time you wake up at 7:30, Mary has already been working for 3 hours. She's lit 15 fires throughout the house, helped prepare breakfast, emptied chamber pots, yes, that's exactly what it sounds like, and scrubbed the front steps all before you've opened your eyes. I read a diary from a scullery maid who worked in London in the 1860s. She recorded working 119 hours in a single week. For context, a modern full-time job is 40 hours, and her hands were so raw from cleaning that she wrapped them in rags at night to keep from staining her bedding with blood. Now it's nearly time to prepare for Lady Montgomery's tea. Your mother summons you to her sitting room for final instructions. Every detail matter. Show many times you may decline a cake before accepting, exactly once. Which chair to take, never the most comfortable one, but also not the least desirable. How to hold your teacup by the handle, never cupping it with both hands. And remember, your mother says, adjusting the cameo at her throat, Lady Montgomery's son will be returning from Oxford next week. He'll be at the Harwick's dinner on Friday. There it is, the real purpose of today's visit. This isn't just tea, it's reconnaissance. Your mother wants to extract information about the young man, his interests, his prospects. Because you're 21 now, and in Victorian England, that's dangerously close to spinsterhood. Your lady's maid helps you change into your visiting dress, the blue one, thank goodness, and pins a small hat to your elaborately styled hair. Gloves are essential. No respectable woman would go bare-handed in public. Your mother inspects you critically before nodding her approval. The carriage ride to Lady Montgomery's Belgravia home takes 20 minutes. You sit rigid, careful not to wrinkle your dress. Your mother uses this time to remind you of key points. Remember, Eleanor, smile pleasantly, but not excessively. Never contradict, even if you know something to be incorrect. Show interest in others' opinions without offering too many of your own. In your head, you're thinking, so basically, be a pretty doll with no thoughts. But you say, yes, mother, because that's what's expected. When we arrive at Lady Montgomery's townhouse, a butler greets us at the door. Your mother hands him her calling card, an essential social tool. These small cards were your Victorian social media profile. Everything from the quality of the paper to the style of engraving signalled your status. The drawing room is already filled with ladies in elegant afternoon dress. The air is heavy with perfume and the muted sounds of appropriate conversation. No politics, no religion, no money talk. These topics were strictly forbidden in mixed company. Lady Montgomery, a formidable woman in her 60s, sits like a queen holding court. You follow your mother's lead, approaching her first and curtsying before she extends her hand. "Miss Eleanor," she says, her eyes quickly assessing everything from your dress to your posture. "How lovely to see you again." You murmur the appropriate response, feeling like you're walking a tightrope. One wrong step and you'd plummet from social grace. And just as you take your seat, the drawing room door opens again. The butler announces new arrivals: Mr. and Mrs. Harwick, Miss Harwick, and Mr. James Harwick. The room subtly shifts. Mr. James Harwick wasn't expected. He wasn't supposed to return from Oxford until next week. Your mother's eyes widen slightly, the only indication of her surprise. The young man who enters behind his parents is tall, with the confident bearing of someone born to privilege. As he scans the room, his eyes meet yours briefly. And suddenly, all those ridiculous rules, the corseting, the small talk, the calculated social visits have a purpose, because in Victorian England, this is how the game is played, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The game of social survival is about to begin in earnest. The pieces are in place, the rules set, though invisible to outsiders, and you're expected to play perfectly, even though no one has ever explained all the rules. How much of your true self will you sacrifice to win, and what happens if you lose? Unlike you, safe in your comfortable bed with the freedom to be whoever you choose tomorrow, the young Victorian woman had no such luxury. Her entire future balanced on the knife edge of propriety. As the tea is served in delicate porcelain cups, you're careful to stir without clinking the spoon against the sides, a cardinal sin in Victorian etiquette. You accept a small cake after declining once, never accept immediately. It appears greedy. And all the while, you're hyper-aware of Mr. Harwick's presence across the room. The afternoon stretches on, a carefully orchestrated dance of meaningless pleasantries and deadly serious social manoeuvring. By the time we leave, your face aches from maintaining a pleasant expression and your ribs throb from the corset. But there's a spark of something new. Perhaps the game is worth playing after all, if Mr. Harwick continues to steal glances your way throughout the afternoon. As the carriage carries us home, your mother is already planning the next move in this elaborate social chess match. Tomorrow will bring new rules, new challenges, new opportunities to rise or fall in society's estimation. And as the sun sets over London, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, servants are preparing for evening duties while their employers prepare for dinner parties and social calls. The invisible machine of Victorian society continues its relentless motion, powered by strict rules, rigid hierarchies, and the constant fear of making a fatal social mistake. Speaking of people who didn't have the luxury of choice, let's rewind to 4:30 that same morning. While Eleanor won't open her eyes for another 3 hours, the household machine that makes her life possible is already grinding into motion. The attic is pitch black and freezing, so cold you can see your breath hanging in the air like ghost whispers. Jane, Eleanor's lady's maid, wakes with a jolt at the sound of a small bell. No gentle sunrise awakening here, just the harsh ring of the housekeeper's handbell cutting through the darkness. Jane shares this cramped space with 3 other female servants. Their beds are jammed together under the eaves, where the ceiling slopes so low she can't stand upright. In summer, this room becomes an oven. In winter, it's barely warmer than the street outside. Ice crystals have formed on the inside of the small window. Look, I've actually slept in a restored Victorian servants' quarters during my research. Even with modern underfloor heating secretly installed, it was miserable. The original servants didn't even have proper mattresses, just straw-filled ticking that rustled with every move. Jane dresses quickly in the dark, her fingers numb from cold. No basin of warm water awaits her. Instead, she breaks the ice in the pitcher with her knuckles and splashes the frigid water on her face. The shock jolts her fully awake. Her uniform a plain black dress with white collar and cuff shangs from a nail on the wall. It's the same one she wore yesterday and the day before. She has 2 uniforms total, washing one while wearing the other. The dress is well mended but threadbare in places. Still, it must be immaculate. Any spot or wrinkle will earn a scolding from Mrs. Phillips, the housekeeper. "Mary's late again," whispers Annie, the kitchen maid who sleeps beside Jane. "Mrs. Phillips will have her hide." "She was up past midnight polishing silver," Jane whispers back, lacing her boots with practised speed. "Poor thing's dead on her feet." Mary, the scullery maid, is just 13. She came from the workhouse 6 months ago, and the constant labour has hollowed her cheeks and roughened her hands. But she's still one of the lucky ones. Many workhouse children ended up in factories or mines. Seriously, I looked at employment records from this period. Kids as young as 8 were working 16-hour days. The Victorians had this bizarre dual view of childhood. They romanticised it in literature while simultaneously working children half to death. Make it make sense. The bell rings again, more insistently. Jane and Annie exchange glances before heading downstairs, careful to tread silently on the servants' staircase. This narrow, winding stairwell runs behind the walls of the main house, one of many architectural features designed to keep servants invisible. When the family walks through their elegant hallways, they never see the cramped passages where servants scurry like mice in the walls. The whole system is designed so dirty, work remains unseen, creating the illusion that aristocratic homes magically clean themselves. The kitchen is the beating heart of the house, and at this hour, it's the only truly warm place. Cook is already there, her massive arms deep in bread dough. The fire in the cast-iron range roars, ready for the day's endless cooking. "You're to light the fires in the morning room and dining room first," Cook says without looking up. "Then Lady Eleanor's room. His lordship wants the study fire lit early today. He has correspondence before breakfast." No good morning, no pleasantries. In the service world, efficiency trumps niceties. The household runs on a precise schedule and every minute counts. Jane grabs a scuttle of coal and heads upstairs with Annie. They move through the silent house like ghosts, lighting fires in each designated room. The coal dust clings to Jane's hands and face, but she can't appear before the family looking soiled. She'll have to wash again before waking Eleanor. "Have you heard?" Annie whispers as they kneel before the dining room grate. "Mr. Harwick's son is back from Oxford. They say he's coming to Lady Montgomery's tea today." "How do you know that?" Jane asks, carefully arranging kindling. Annie grins. "Mr. Phillips heard it from Lord Hartley's valet, who heard it from Lady Harwick's maid." This right here is the Victorian Servant Intelligence Network. While the aristocrats had their formal information channels, servants had their own shadow system. They traded gossip and news across households, knowing everything before their employers did. They were the original social media, just with more coal dust and less doom scrolling. "Miss Eleanor's mother will be beside herself," Jane says. "She's been hunting a suitable match for months." The prospect of Eleanor marrying actually fills Jane with conflicting emotions. She's genuinely fond of her young mistress, who treats her more kindly than most, but if Eleanor marries, Jane might be out of a position, or worse, have to relocate if Eleanor moves to her husband's estate. For servants, job security was never guaranteed. You could be dismissed without reference for offences as minor as breaking a teacup or speaking out of turn. Without a reference, finding new employment was nearly impossible. Many former servants ended up in prostitution or the workhouse when they lost their positions. By 6:30, Jane has lit 7 fires, helped prepare breakfast trays, and finally washed the coal dust from her hands and face. She changes her soiled apron for a clean one before heading to Eleanor's room. On the way, she passes Mr. Phillips, the butler, inspecting the footmen before they begin their duties. The male servants form another branch of the household hierarchy entirely. At the top stands Mr. Phillips, ramrod straight, impeccably dressed, the absolute authority over the male staff. Under him are the footmen, chosen specifically for their height and good looks. These men are essentially the Rolex watches of the Victorian era status symbols that wealthy families display prominently. Matching footmen over 6 feet tall, peak aristocratic flex. Some families even paid taller footmen higher wages, which is basically the 1860s version of spending extra for the premium smartphone. The footmen wear powdered wigs and elaborate livery in the family colours. Their jobs include announcing visitors, serving meals, carrying heavy items, and generally looking impressive. They earn more than female servants, despite doing less actual work, a fact that doesn't escape the women's notice. "Jane," Mr. Phillips says with a curt nod as she passes. Though they're both senior servants, the butler outranks even the housekeeper. His word is law. "Mr. Phillips," she replies with appropriate deference. Every interaction between servants follows strict protocols. Even in the servants' hall, they don't use first names. It's always Mr. Phillips and Mrs. Phillips, even though the housekeeper isn't actually married. Mrs. is simply her title of respect. Younger servants are addressed by their surnames only. When Jane enters Eleanor's bedroom, she moves silently, placing the warm water basin on the washstand before drawing the curtains. The room is freezing despite the newly lit fire. She stands for a moment, watching Eleanor sleep, aware of how different their lives are, despite being similar in age. "Good morning, miss," she says softly, the same greeting she's used every morning for 3 years. As Eleanor begins her day, Jane is already into her 3rd hour of work. When she helps Eleanor dress, her own back aches from carrying coal and her eyes burn from lack of sleep, but her hands remain gentle, her demeanour calm and efficient. "The blue dress or the green for today?" Eleanor asks. Jane knows this isn't just about colour preference. Every detail of appearance carries social significance. She's learned to navigate these waters carefully. "The blue, miss," she says after a moment's consideration. Lady Montgomery mentioned last week that green reminds her of illness. Eleanor nods, accepting Jane's wisdom in these matters. This is where Jane finds small moments of power. Her knowledge of the social world makes her valuable. The aristocrats may have money and status, but servants have information and access. I found this fascinating letter from a lady's maid in the 1870s who wrote, "I know more about my mistress than her own husband does. I dress her wounds, both physical and emotional. I know which corset hides which secret. In some ways, she belongs more to me than to him." Talk about complicated power dynamics. The process of dressing Eleanor is laborious. Jane's hands work methodically through each layer: chemise, drawers, corset, petticoats, dress, while her mind catalogues the day's remaining tasks. After helping Eleanor dress, she'll need to clean the bedroom, empty the chamber pot, refresh the linens, mend any torn clothing, and prepare Eleanor's evening dress. Then there's Lady Hartley's tea to prepare for. As Jane tightens Eleanor's corset, she's careful not to pull too severely. Some ladies' maids take pride in achieving the smallest possible waist for their mistresses, regardless of comfort. Jane has seen girls faint from tight lacing and knows the long-term damage it causes. "A bit more, miss?" she asks, though she can already see Eleanor struggling to breathe. "Yes," Eleanor gasps. "Lady Montgomery will notice if I'm not properly cinched." Jane complies, feeling a twinge of guilt. This is the contradiction of her position. She cares for Eleanor while simultaneously participating in her physical restriction. Once Eleanor is dressed and her hair arranged, Jane will have a brief moment to eat her own breakfast before beginning the day's cleaning. Servants' meals are taken in the servants' hall, presided over by Mr. and Mrs. Phillips. The servants' hall sits in the basement, a plain room with a long wooden table. The seating arrangement strictly follows rank. Mr. Phillips sits at the head, Mrs. Phillips at the foot. The higher-ranking servants' lady's maid, valet, cooks it nearest them, while the lower servants' scullery maids, hall boys, cluster at the centre. Jane takes her place near Mrs. Phillips, a position that reflects her status as lady's maid. The breakfast is simple, but filling porridge, bread, and strong tea. Unlike the elaborate spread served upstairs, servants' food is basic fuel for the day's labour. "You'll need to prepare Miss Eleanor's evening dress for the Wilkinsons' dinner tomorrow," Mrs. Phillips says to Jane between bites. "And Lady Hartley has requested extra hands for this afternoon's tea. You and Sarah will assist their staff." No one groans or protests, though this means an even longer day than usual. Servants don't have the luxury of showing frustration. Oh, and get this, Victorian servants typically worked 16 to 18-hour days, but they were expected to look pleasant the entire time. One household manual literally states, "A servant with a sour countenance renders disservice to the household atmosphere." Basically, smile while you're being worked to death, or you're fired. The conversation at breakfast is muted and practical, centred entirely on the day's work. Personal matters have no place here. Even friendships between servants must be conducted with restraint. Romance between servants could result in immediate dismissal. This reminds me of these insane rules I found in a Victorian household manual. One actually said, "No followers allowed." Translation: servants weren't permitted to have visitors, romantic or otherwise. Your entire social life happened within those walls with the same handful of people for years on end. Talk about claustrophobic. After breakfast, Jane returns upstairs to clean Eleanor's room once she's gone down to breakfast. The bed must be made, the fire tended, the chamber pot emptied and cleaned. Any discarded clothing needs to be examined for repairs. As she strips the bed linens, Jane hears Mrs. Hartley's voice from the hallway, instructing the housekeeper about the day's arrangements. The mention of Lady Montgomery's tea and Mr. Harwick's son confirms Annie's earlier gossip. Jane smiles to herself. By this evening, every servant in 5 neighbouring households will know exactly what happened at Lady Montgomery's tea, including details the family thinks private. It's one of the few advantages of invisibility. You see and hear everything when people forget you're there. Mid-morning finds Jane in the laundry room, mending a tear in one of Eleanor's petticoats. The laundry room is hot and damp, filled with the harsh smell of lye soap. 2 housemaids are scrubbing linens in large copper tubs, their hands red and chapped. "Has anyone seen Mary?" Mrs. Phillips appears in the doorway, her face stern. She was supposed to polish the silver an hour ago. The housemaids exchange nervous glances but say nothing. Jane focuses intently on her stitching. "If you're covering for her again," Mrs. Phillips begins, but stops as Mary appears behind her, looking pale and exhausted. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Phillips," Mary says, her voice barely audible. "I was helping cook with the bread delivery." Mrs. Phillips narrows her eyes, clearly not believing this excuse. "The silver won't polish itself, girl. Get to it immediately." Mary nods and hurries away, but not before Jane notices her swaying slightly on her feet. "That child's not well," Jane says once Mrs. Phillips has left. "She'll be sent back to the workhouse if she can't keep up," one of the housemaids replies matter-of-factly. And that's the brutal reality. Illness isn't an excuse for servants. There are no sick days, no vacations. You work through fever, pain, exhaustion, or you lose your position. Mary's alternatives to service are grim: the workhouse, the streets, or perhaps a factory where conditions are even worse. I found medical records from London hospitals in this era that showed servant girls with chronic respiratory problems from sleeping in damp attics, permanent back damage from carrying heavy loads, and chemical burns from cleaning products. The physical toll was brutal. By midday, the house hums with activity in preparation for the afternoon. Eleanor and her mother have gone out for morning calls, a crucial part of the social circuit. They'll return for a light luncheon before changing for Lady Montgomery's tea. Jane takes advantage of their absence to air out Eleanor's evening dresses and check for any repairs needed. As she works, she watches through the window as the carriage returns, bringing Eleanor and her mother home. Minutes later, the bell in Eleanor's room rings, the signal for Jane to attend her mistress. She hurries upstairs, where Eleanor is already removing her gloves. "Jane, I'll need to change immediately," Eleanor says, her voice tense with excitement. "Mother says we must arrive at Lady Montgomery's precisely at 3. As Jane helps Eleanor change into her tea dress, the blue one, of course, she notices her mistress's heightened colour and nervous energy. "Is everything all right, miss?" Jane asks, securing a hairpin. Eleanor meets her eyes in the mirror. There's a moment of genuine connection between them, rare in this rigidly stratified world. "Mr. Harwick's son is back from Oxford," Eleanor says. "He'll be at Lady Montgomery's today." Mother says, "Well, never mind what Mother says." Jane nods, understanding perfectly. The marriage market is in full swing, and Eleanor is the product being displayed. For all her privilege, Eleanor's future is hardly her own to determine. "The blue brings out your eyes, miss," Jane says, adjusting the fall of the skirt. "Very becoming." It's the closest she can come to expressing support. When Eleanor and her mother depart for the tea, the household shifts into a different rhythm. With the family out, servants catch momentary breaths between tasks. The cook prepares dinner, while housemaids polish silver and dust ornaments. Footmen polish boots and brush the master's clothing. Jane uses this time to prepare Eleanor's things for the evening and the following day. As she works, she allows herself to wonder about her own future. At 23, she's already considered middle-aged in service years. Ladies' maids can work well into their 40s, if they're skilled. But eventually, their eyesight fails, or their fingers become too arthritic for fine needlework. What then? Jane has managed to save a small amount from her wages, 7 over 3 years, hidden in a tin box beneath her mattress. Not enough to retire on, certainly not enough to open the small hat shop she sometimes dreams about. The best she can realistically hope for is to remain with Eleanor if she marries well, or perhaps advance to housekeeper in her later years. The alternative, dismissal without reference or becoming too infirm to work, leads inevitably to the workhouse. This, too, is a kind of invisible cage, different from Eleanor's but no less confining. Late afternoon sun slants through the windows as Jane finishes arranging Eleanor's evening clothes. The house is quiet, except for the distant sounds of cook banging pots in the kitchen and a footman polishing brass in the hallway. Soon the family will return and the evening machinery will grind into motion. Dinner to be served, clothes to be changed, fires to be stoked. The endless cycle of service continues without pause. Jane allows herself one small moment of rest, sitting on the window seat in Eleanor's room, something she'd never do if the family were home. From here, she can see the street below, where people move freely about their business. A young couple walks arm in arm, laughing at some private joke. A delivery boy whistles as he pushes his cart. Even the street sweeper, for all his poverty, can end his day and go where he pleases. Jane touches the cool glass, the invisible barrier between her world and theirs. Then, the distant sound of carriage wheels alerts her that the family is returning. She rises quickly, smoothing her apron and resuming her proper position. Her moment of rest is over. The invisible woman must return to work. When Eleanor bursts into the room 30 minutes later, her face is flushed with excitement. Jane immediately knows the tea was a success. "Jane," Eleanor exclaims, unusually animated, "you'll never believe what happened at Lady Montgomery's." As Jane helps remove Eleanor's hat and gloves, Eleanor describes her interaction with Mr. James Harwick in detail, how he asked about her interest in music, how he complimented her blue dress, how he mentioned attending the Wilkinsons' dinner tomorrow night. Jane listens attentively, while storing away every detail. This information is valuable currency in the servants' hall. "Mother is beside herself," Eleanor confides as Jane loosens her corset, allowing her to breathe freely for the first time all day. "She's already planning what I should wear tomorrow." "The pale pink silk would be lovely, miss," Jane suggests. "I can refresh the lace trim tonight." Eleanor squeezes Jane's hand impulsively, an unusual breach of the barrier between mistress and servant. "What would I do without you, Jane?" The question hangs in the air, both knowing it's more complicated than it appears. Their relationship exists within strict boundaries, genuine affection constrained by social roles neither of them created. Later, as Jane descends to the servants' hall for the brief dinner break before evening duties, she considers Eleanor's excitement. In her position, Jane will never experience the courtship rituals of the upper classes. Servants rarely marry, permission is required and often denied. Those who do marry usually must leave service. In the servants' hall, the day's gossip is exchanged in hushed tones. Annie has already heard about Mr. Harwick's attention to Eleanor from one of Lady Montgomery's maids. "They say he's worth 10,000 a year," Annie whispers, "and not hard on the eyes, either." "Good for Miss Eleanor," Jane replies, though part of her wonders what it means for her own future. The servants' dinner is quick and basic stew made from leftover meat from the family's lunch, bread and tea. As they eat, Mr. Phillips reminds them of additional duties for tomorrow's preparation for the Wilkinsons' dinner. "It will be a late night tomorrow," he concludes. "Adjust your schedules accordingly." Translation: "You'll work even longer hours with no additional compensation." As darkness falls outside, the house enters its evening phase. Lamps are lit, fires built up for the night, beds turned down. The family dines, entertains, retires to the drawing room for music or cards. Through it all, servants move silently, anticipating needs, remaining invisible unless needed. Jane helps Eleanor change for dinner, then into her nightclothes later. By the time Eleanor is safely tucked into bed, it's nearly midnight. Jane's day, however, is not yet over. She must still prepare clothes for tomorrow, mend the lace on the pink silk dress, and polish Eleanor's best shoes. When Jane finally climbs the narrow stairs to the attic shortly after 1 a.m, she's been awake and working for nearly 21 hours. Her back aches, her fingers are pricked from needlework, and her eyes burn with exhaustion. Yet as she collapses onto her thin mattress, she knows she's luckier than many. She has a roof, regular meals, and relative security. She doesn't have to sell herself on the streets or work in a factory breathing lint and chemicals all day. The other maids are already asleep, their breathing creating a gentle rhythm in the dark room. Outside, London continues its nocturnal life fare away from this hidden attic where invisible women briefly rest before beginning again tomorrow. Jane closes her eyes, too tired even to remove her dress. In a few hours, the bell will ring and she'll rise to light fires, carry coal, heat water, and help Eleanor pursue her matrimonial ambitions. The social dance continues, above stairs and below, each group performing their prescribed steps in a complex choreography of class and duty. The clock strikes 10 in another part of London, and with it, a completely different set of invisible rules clicks into place. While Eleanor prepares for her social tea and Jane tends to a dozen silent duties across town in a respectable middle-class neighbourhood, Mrs. Charlotte Wilson adjusts her bonnet in the hallway mirror. Unlike the aristocratic Hartleys with their army of servants, the Wilsons make do with just two, a cook and a maid-of-all-work. Their semi-detached house in Bloomsbury is comfortable but modest, a physical manifestation of their precarious position in Victorian society. Too genteel for trade, not wealthy enough for true leisure. "Martha," Charlotte calls, "I'm going to the shops. Please make sure Mr. Wilson's study is dusted before he returns from his office." Martha, a girl of 16 who does the work of what would be 5 separate servants in the Hartley household, appears from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am. Will you be back for luncheon?" "I should think so," Charlotte replies. "I'm only going to Covent Garden and perhaps Regent Street." This casual exchange would shock the Hartleys. Upper-class ladies rarely spoke directly to servants about household matters. That's what housekeepers were for. But the middle class operated with fewer buffers between mistress and staff, creating a strange intimacy even within strict hierarchy. I spoke with a historian who specialises in Victorian middle-class homes, and she showed me household account books where you can literally see the financial anxiety on every page. These families were constantly calculating, constantly worried about keeping up appearances without going bankrupt. Charlotte steps out onto the street, immediately pulling her skirt slightly up with her right hand, not enough to show ankle, which would be scandalous, but just enough to avoid the mud and horse droppings that plague London streets. Even in respectable neighbourhoods, sanitation is primitive by our standards. For Charlotte, today's shopping expedition isn't just about provisions, it's a tightrope walk of social signalling. Every purchase, every interaction is governed by the middle class's most sacred commandment, "Thou shalt appear more prosperous than thou art." Her first stop is the baker's shop. The bell tinkles as she enters, and Mrs. Parker, the baker's wife, greets her with appropriate deference. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. The usual order today?" Charlotte hesitates. Her husband Thomas's law practice has been slow this month and economies are needed, but cutting back on quality bread would signal financial trouble to the neighbourhood. "Yes, the usual," she decides, "and perhaps one of those small seed cakes as well." The seed cake is an unnecessary expense, but it allows Charlotte to project prosperity while actually buying less than last week. This constant calculation, what to skimp on, what to splurge on for appearance's sake, is the exhausting mental arithmetic of middle-class Victorian life. Wait, you know what I find wild? The average middle-class Victorian woman spent about 25% of her household budget on maintaining appearances. Think about that. A quarter of everything they had went not to comfort or security, but to looking the part. It was literally putting food money into status symbols. As Charlotte pays, she's careful to draw her coins from a modest purse, not the cheaper coin pouch she actually prefers. The performance of gentility never stops. Next is the butcher's shop, where the real class navigation begins. As Charlotte approaches, she notices two women already at the counter own, clearly a cook from a wealthy household, the other a working-class housewife buying cheap cuts. The timing creates a dilemma. If Charlotte enters now, the butcher will be forced to choose whose order to prioritise. Social etiquette dictates he serve the representative from the wealthier household first, but that would mean either the cook or Charlotte, depending on whose employer has higher status. These micro moments of class negotiation happen dozens of times daily. Who steps aside on the sidewalk? Who is served first? Who speaks first? Every interaction is a subtle reinforcement of the invisible hierarchies that govern Victorian life. Charlotte pauses, pretending to adjust her glove until the working-class woman finishes her purchase. This allows her to avoid the awkward negotiation entirely. Such strategic delays are essential skills for middle-class Victorians navigating social waters. Inside, the butcher greets her with a respectful Mrs. Wilson while finishing the cook's substantial order, clearly for a household far wealthier than Charlotte's. "Just a small roast today, Mr. Simmons," Charlotte says when her turn comes, "and perhaps some stewing beef for tomorrow." The butcher raises an eyebrow slightly. This is less than her usual order, another sign of the Wilsons' tightening finances. But Charlotte immediately adds, "We're dining at the Hendersons tonight, you see," creating a socially acceptable explanation for the reduced purchase. This is quintessential middle-class strategy. When economizing is necessary, attribute it to social engagements. Better to be thought busy than broke. As Mr. Simmons wraps her meat in paper, Charlotte casually asks, "I don't suppose you've heard anything about the Hartwicks?" "I understand their son has returned from Oxford." The butcher's face lights up with the universal expression of someone with gossip to share. "Indeed, ma'am, my boy delivers to their cook, and word is the young Mr. Harwick was at Lady Montgomery's tea yesterday, paying particular attention to the Hartley girl." Charlotte nods thoughtfully. "How interesting." This exchange exemplifies another middle-class survival skill information gathering. Without access to the aristocratic social circuit, middle-class Victorians relied on servants, shopkeepers, and church connections to stay informed about social movements above their station. Knowledge was power, especially for families like the Wilsons with marriageable daughters. 17-year-old Emily Wilson wouldn't be considered for someone of James Harwick's status, but the ripple effects of aristocratic marriages often created opportunities further down the social ladder. I came across these fascinating middle-class matchmaking manuals from the 1860s. They basically taught parents how to leverage high society marriages to improve their own children's prospects, like social networking, but with wedding rings and massive property transfers. With her purchases secured, Charlotte continues to Covent Garden Market, the bustling heart of London commerce where all classes inevitably collide. The market is a sensory assault vendors shouting their wares, the smell of fresh produce mingling with horse manure, pickpockets and society ladies navigating the same crowded passages. Here, the carefully separated worlds of Victorian London temporarily converge. Charlotte moves purposefully, ignoring the fishmongers and lower-class food stalls. As a respectable middle-class woman, she buys certain items directly, but delegates the purchasing of coarse foods like fish to her maid. Heaven forbid someone of her station be seen haggling over mackerel. As she selects vegetables from a farmer's stall, a commotion erupts nearby. A well-dressed gentleman is accusing a ragged boy of stealing his handkerchief. The boy, no more than 10, protests his innocence while the man grips his collar. The crowd parts slightly, creating the instinctive separation that occurs whenever cross-class conflict erupts. Charlotte looks away as etiquette demands. Public disputes are to be ignored by the genteel, especially those involving the lower classes. But as she turns, she accidentally makes eye contact with a finely dressed woman observing the scene. With a jolt, Charlotte recognises Mrs Hartley, Eleanor's mother, accompanied by a maid carrying her purchases. This chance encounter presents both opportunity and danger. The Wilsons and Hartleys occupy entirely different social spheres. Under normal circumstances, Mrs Hartley would have no reason to acknowledge Charlotte, whose husband is merely a moderately successful solicitor. But they share a tenuous connection. Charlotte's husband handled some minor legal matters for Mrs Hartley's brother years ago. Is this sufficient for Charlotte to offer a greeting? If she acknowledges Mrs Hartley and is snubbed, the humiliation would be significant. If she doesn't acknowledge her and Mrs Hartley expects it, she appears presumptuous. These split-second social calculations were the constant mental load of Victorian middle-class women. One wrong move could close doors or create lasting embarrassment. Charlotte opts for the middle pather slight nod, nothing so forward as a greeting, but enough to be acknowledged if Mrs Hartley chooses. To her surprise, Mrs Hartley approaches. "Mrs Wilson, isn't it? Thomas Wilson's wife." Charlotte curtsies slightly. "Yes, indeed. Mrs Hartley, how lovely to see you. You must pass my regards to your husband. My brother speaks highly of his legal counsel." This public acknowledgement is social currency more valuable than anything Charlotte could purchase in the market. Being seen conversing with Mrs Hartley elevates her status instantly. "Thank you, I certainly shall. I understand congratulations may soon be in order for your daughter." Mrs Hartley's eyebrows raise slightly at this presumption, but she merely says, "Nothing is settled, of course, though we have hopes." The exchange lasts less than a minute, but its effects will ripple through Charlotte's social standing for weeks. As Mrs Hartley moves on, followed by her silent maid, Charlotte allows herself a small smile. This chance meeting can be leveraged in a dozen subtle ways. The Victorian middle class were masters at this game-creating connections, maximising chance encounters, stretching small advantages into larger ones. Without inherited wealth or position, social climbing required constant vigilance and opportunism. You think networking events today are stressful? Imagine your entire family's future depending on whether you correctly interpret the meaning behind someone's head nod at the vegetable stand. That was everyday life for the Victorian middle class. Charlotte completes her shopping with a new energy. The encounter with Mrs Hartley has improved her day immeasurably. As she turns toward home, she nearly collides with a gentleman rounding the corner. "I do beg your pardon," she begins, then stops short. It's James Harwick himself, accompanied by another young man. "Entirely my fault, madam," he says politely, tipping his hat before continuing on. He doesn't recognise her, of course, they've never been formally introduced, but Charlotte has seen him at church and knows his face well. This second brush with the Hartwick-Hartley connection feels almost like fate. By the time Charlotte returns home, her mind is racing with possibilities. If the Hartleys and Hartwicks do form an alliance through marriage, perhaps the connection could somehow benefit Emily. At the very least, Mrs Hartley's acknowledgement can be mentioned casually in conversation at the Hendersons' dinner tonight. The middle-class social game requires playing every small advantage. Martha takes the packages as Charlotte removes her bonnet in the hallway. "Did you have a pleasant morning, ma'am?" "Most illuminating," Charlotte replies. "Is Miss Emily back from her music lesson?" "Yes, ma'am. She's in the drawing room practising her scales." The mention of music lessons highlights another aspect of middle-class Victorian life, the constant investment in marriageability. Despite their tight finances, the Wilsons pay for Emily's piano instruction, drawing lessons, and French tutor. These accomplishments are essential capital in the marriage market. Unlike aristocratic girls, middle-class daughters couldn't rely on family name or fortune to secure husbands. Instead, they needed to display the refined skills that signalled their worthiness to marry into equal or higher status. Charlotte finds Emily at the piano, dutifully practicing. Despite clearly having little musical talent, the girl looks up hopefully as her mother enters. "Any interesting news from your shopping, mother?" The question isn't innocent. Emily, like all Victorian daughters, understands her future depends on favourable marriage prospects. Any social intelligence is potentially relevant to her chances. As a matter of fact, Charlotte says, taking a seat on the sofa, "I encountered Mrs Hartley at the market. She was quite cordial." Emily's eyes widen. The Hartleys are far above their social circle. "And," Charlotte continues, savouring the moment, "I nearly collided with young Mr Harwick himself." James Harwick, the one everyone says will propose to Eleanor Hartley? Charlotte nods. The very same, though nothing is settled yet, according to Mrs Hartley. Emily processes this information. At 17, she's already well versed in the mathematics of social advantage. If he marries Miss Hartley, and we have a connection to Mrs Hartley through Uncle William. Precisely, Charlotte says. It's a distant connection, but connections are currency, my dear. This conversation would never happen in an aristocratic household where marriages were arranged through direct negotiation between families. The middle class had to be more creative, seeking indirect routes to advantageous matches. The front door opens, signalling Thomas Wilson's return for luncheon. Charlotte rises, smoothing her dress. "Not a word to your father yet," she cautions Emily. "Let me find the right moment to mention it." Thomas Wilson enters the drawing room, a man whose appearance perfectly reflects his middle-class status. His clothes are good quality but not fashionable, his manner dignified but lacking aristocratic ease. He carries the weight of being the family's sole financial support, visibly in his posture. "Charlotte, Emily," he greets them, kissing his wife's cheek. "Any news today?" "Nothing of consequence," Charlotte replies, temporarily keeping her social victories to herself. Luncheon should be ready shortly. As they move to the dining room, the contrast with the Hartleys' home is stark. Instead of a butler and footman, Martha serves the meal herself. The food is good, but simple cold meat from yesterday's roast, bread, cheese, and a vegetable soup. "I've invited the Henderson's son to dinner next week," Thomas mentions as they eat. He's doing well at his father's shipping firm, quite promising. The purpose of this invitation is transparent. Robert Henderson is a suitable match for Emily, not exciting or wealthy, but solid and respectable. Middle-class marriages were primarily practical alliances, combining modest resources to maintain or slightly improve social position. Charlotte nods approvingly while cataloguing the extra expense this dinner will require. They'll need to serve wine and a proper 3 courses. Martha will need help. Perhaps the cook's niece can be hired for the evening. These calculations never cease. "That reminds me," she says, seizing the opportunity. "I encountered Mrs Hartley at the market today. She asked me to pass on her regards to you. Apparently her brother speaks highly of your legal assistance." Thomas looks up, surprised and pleased. Did she indeed? Most gracious of her. This is how the middle-class game is played. Casual mentions of upper-class connections, strategic flattery, careful positioning. Every social interaction is an opportunity to reinforce or improve status. After luncheon, Thomas returns to his office, Emily resumes her piano practice, and Charlotte retreats to her small writing desk to review household accounts. This private moment reveals the truth behind the carefully maintained facade. The Wilsons are struggling financially. Thomas's law practice is respectable but not lucrative. Educating their son at a decent school consumes much of their income. Maintaining even 2 servants stretches their budget, yet reducing their standard of living would have catastrophic social consequences. Charlotte stares at the columns of figures, looking for places to economise that won't be visible to others. This is the hidden reality of middle-class Victorian life-genteel poverty, concealed behind a veneer of respectability. Maybe the cook can make soup more often. Perhaps Charlotte's dress for the Hendersons' dinner can be refurbished rather than replaced. Small sacrifices to maintain the essential appearance of prosperity. You know what kills me about this era? They'd literally go hungry before they'd give up appearances. There are accounts of middle-class families who kept a servant they couldn't afford while eating only bread themselves, because not having a servant would reveal their financial struggles. The performance was everything. As Charlotte works, Martha appears at the door. "Excuse me, ma'am, Miss Porter has come to call." Harriet Porter is Charlotte's closest friend and another middle-class wife navigating similar circumstances. Charlotte quickly puts away the account book. Financial details were never discussed, even with friends, and moves to the drawing room to receive her visitor. The ritual of afternoon calls was as important to the middle class as to the aristocracy, though less formal. These visits maintained social networks and provided crucial information exchange disguised as casual conversation. "Harriet, how lovely to see you," Charlotte greets her friend as Martha shows her in. The 2 women exchange the customary pleasantries before Harriet leans forward with the universal expression of someone bringing juicy gossip. "Have you heard about the Hartwicks? Their son is back from Oxford, and apparently he's shown interest in Eleanor Hartley." Charlotte smiles, savouring the rare pleasure of being ahead of the news. "As a matter of fact, I encountered Mrs Hartley herself at the market today. She was quite acknowledging." Harriet's eyes widen appropriately. "Did she mention the connection?" "She said nothing is settled, but they have hopes." This exchange of information continues, each woman offering social intelligence valuable to the other, which families are rising or falling in circumstances, which young men are considered eligible, which shops are extending credit too liberally. For middle-class Victorian women, these conversations weren't idle gossip, but essential strategic planning. Without inherited position or guaranteed income, social survival depended on accurately reading the constantly shifting landscape of connections and opportunities. As they talk, Charlotte serves tea, not the elaborate spread of an aristocratic household, but a respectable offering of tea and seed cake. The quality of these refreshments is noted and judged, another data point in the complex social calculus. "Robert Henderson is coming to dinner next week," Charlotte mentions, casually establishing her daughter's marriage prospects. "Thomas thinks highly of him." Harriet nods approvingly. "A sensible match. His father's business is doing well, I hear." The unspoken subtext is clear. Not an exciting match, not a love match, but a prudent one that will maintain Emily's position. For the middle class, romantic love was a luxury that came after ensuring financial security. When Harriet departs, Charlotte returns to her accounts with a renewed sense of purpose. The social information gathered today, the connection to Mrs Hartley, the confirmation of James Harwick's interest in Eleanor, the positive report on Robert Henderson's prospects, all represent potential advantages to be carefully maximised. This is the middle-class Victorian woman's true work, managing the family's social position with the same attention a business manager gives to profit margins. Every interaction, every purchase, every invitation is evaluated for its potential impact on status and connections. As afternoon fades toward evening, Charlotte prepares for the Hendersons' dinner party. Unlike Eleanor Hartley with her Ladys Maid, Charlotte must manage with Martha's limited assistance. Her dress is fashionable but not new, her jewellery modest but good quality. Thomas emerges from his study, looking tired but determined to present well. For middle-class men, these social engagements were not merely pleasurable diversions, but essential business networking. Many of Thomas's clients came through social connections. "Ready, my dear?" he asks, offering his arm. Charlotte nods, mentally reviewing what she knows about each guest likely to attend, what topics to introduce or avoid, how to subtly mention her encounter with Mrs Hartley without appearing to boast. As they step into the hired hansom cab, not a private carriage like the Hartleys, but respectable transportation for a middle-class couple, Charlotte feels the familiar mixture of anxiety and determination that characterises her social existence. The Wilsons' position is precarious, balanced between genteel respectability and financial uncertainty. One bad investment, one lost client, one social misstep could send them tumbling down the carefully constructed ladder of Victorian society. Yet within these constraints, Charlotte has mastered the art of maximising limited advantages. Today's chance encounters might yield nothing, or they might create opportunities for Emily's future. The middle-class game is played with smaller stakes than the aristocratic one, but with no less skill or strategy. As the cab rattles toward the Hendersons' home, Charlotte straightens her back and composes her features. The performance of middle-class respectability continues, an exhausting but essential dance of appearances and calculated connections. The social survival game enters its evening phase, with new rules and new opportunities, but the fundamental principle remains unchanged. In Victorian society, you are who others believe you to be. Back at Lady Montgomery's elegant Belgravia townhouse, the social battlefield is in full swing. The drawing room hums with carefully modulated female voices, each word a potential weapon or shield in the ongoing war of status and connection. Eleanor sits perched on a damask chair, posture perfect despite her screaming rib cage. The corset that's been compressing her organs since morning now feels like an iron maiden as she maintains the serene expression expected of a well-bred young lady. Lady Montgomery presides over the gathering like a general surveying troops. At 63, she survived 4 decades in London society, outlasting rivals and accumulating the most valuable currency in this world, influence. Her tea table is both throne and command centre. "Miss Hartley," she calls, beckoning Eleanor with a jewelled hand. "Come sit by me and tell me about your music. I understand you play the pianoforte quite adequately." The invitation is both honour and test. Being summoned to Lady Montgomery's immediate circle places Eleanor in the spotlight. Every other woman in the room will observe her performance, judging her worthiness for this elevated attention. I spent weeks researching Victorian women's private correspondence just to understand these social dynamics. The psychological warfare in these drawing rooms was more brutal than anything in modern corporate boardrooms. Lives were literally destroyed over teacups. "You're too kind, Lady Montgomery," Eleanor replies, moving gracefully to the indicated seat. "I practice diligently, though I could never approach your daughter's renowned skill." This is the correct response, modest about her own accomplishments, while complimenting Lady Montgomery's family. Direct self-praise would be vulgar, while failing to acknowledge her hostess's daughter would seem ignorant or dismissive. The older woman nods slightly. The first test passed. "And what did you think of Signor Verdi's latest work? I found it excessively emotional, though fashionably so." This innocent-sounding question is actually a trap. Eleanor doesn't particularly care for Verdi, but she knows Lady Montgomery's nephew is a vocal admirer of the composer. Cultural opinions were never just personal preferences in Victorian society. They were political positions that aligned you with certain factions. Eleanor navigates this hazard with practiced skill. It possesses a certain passionate quality that speaks to modern sensibilities, though I confess I often find myself returning to Mozart for his clarity of expression. Perfect. She's acknowledged the fashionable position without fully committing to it, while indicating her own taste runs to the more conservative, which happens to align with Lady Montgomery's known preferences. Lady Montgomery's thin lips curve slightly. Precisely so. Youth is naturally drawn to romantic excesses, but maturity appreciates classical restraint. From across the room, Eleanor catches her mother's approving glance. Another skirmish successfully managed. This conversation might seem trivial, but imagine your entire future, who you'll marry, where you'll live, your financial security, your children's prospects hanging on whether you express the right opinion about an opera. That was the reality for Victorian women of Eleanor's class. The drawing room itself is a stage set for these performances. Every element is strategically arranged, seating that subtly indicates status hierarchies, tables positioned to create intimate conversation clusters for favoured guests while isolating others, lighting designed to flatter certain faces while casting others in less becoming illumination. Even the positioning of the tea table is calculated. Lady Montgomery can observe every interaction while controlling access to refreshments in Victorian society, quite literally determining who gets fed and who goes hungry. As Eleanor makes appropriate conversation with the women in Lady Montgomery's inner circle, her attention remains fixed on the drawing room entrance. James Harwick and the other gentlemen have yet to appear, still sequestered with Lord Montgomery in his study, likely discussing politics or business topics considered unsuitable for ladies. Wait, let me tell you something wild about Victorian gender segregation. In wealthy homes, men and women would literally spend most of their day in separate spaces. After dinner, the men would stay at the table drinking port while women withdrew to the drawing room. Only later would men join the ladies. This physical separation reinforced the idea that the sexes operated in completely different spheres. Mrs. Pembroke, a notorious gossip with surprising social staying power, leans toward Eleanor with a conspiratorial air. "I understand Mr. James Harwick was quite taken with you at the Wilsons' musicale last season. He inquired about you specifically to Lady Winchester." This statement contains multiple landmines. Is Mrs. Pembroke trying to help by sharing useful intelligence, or attempting to make Eleanor appear presumptuous by suggesting she believes herself worthy of James's attention, and mentioning Lady Winchester implies Mrs. Pembroke has access to higher social circles than Eleanor might have assumed? Eleanor keeps her expression pleasantly neutral. How kind of him to remember our brief introduction. Lady Winchester has always been exceptionally gracious to everyone. The response acknowledges the information without seeming either too eager or dismissive, while subtly suggesting that Lady Winchester's attention isn't as exclusive as Mrs. Pembroke implies. Social parry and thrust disguised as pleasant chit-chat. Mrs. Pembroke's eyes narrow slightly, recognising the skilled counter. She opens her mouth to respond when the drawing-room door opens, and the butler announces the arrival of the gentlemen, Lord Montgomery, Mr. Harwick, Mr. James Harwick, and Mr. Pembroke. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly. Conversations pause, postures straighten imperceptibly, eyes flick toward the new arrivals while pretending not to. The choreography of seeming utterly natural while being acutely self-conscious is one every Victorian woman mastered from girlhood. Eleanor doesn't look directly at James, though she's intensely aware of his presence. To show obvious interest would be catastrophically improper. Instead, she continues her conversation with Lady Montgomery's niece, Miss Catherine, while positioning herself to be visible from where the gentlemen are being served tea. "I cannot tell you how much I admired the embroidery on your handkerchief at church on Sunday," Eleanor says to Catherine, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard without seeming intentionally projected. "Your skill with needle and thread puts mine to shame." Catherine, understanding the game perfectly, responds with equal clarity. "You're too modest, Miss Hartley. Your performance of Chopin at the Bennets' gathering was discussed for days afterward." They're not really talking about embroidery or piano playing. They're broadcasting Eleanor's feminine accomplishments for James's benefit while maintaining the fiction that they're utterly unaware of his presence. Lord Montgomery, a florid-faced man whose social influence derives entirely from his wife's manoeuvring, leads the gentlemen into the room. "Ladies, forgive our absence. Business matters kept us over long." "We quite understand, my lord," Lady Montgomery replies. "Gentlemen must attend to serious matters while we occupy ourselves with trifles." This exchange seems to reinforce the stereotype of female frivolity, but listen to the subtle sarcasm in Lady Montgomery's tone. She's actually mocking the notion, while appearing to endorse Eater doublespeak that the women in the room understand perfectly while the men remain oblivious. "I've read hundreds of Victorian women's private diaries and letters, and you wouldn't believe how they really talked about men when alone. They weren't the delicate, empty-headed creatures men imagined. They were strategists playing a long game with limited pieces on a board designed against them." James Harwick makes his way gradually around the room, stopping for brief exchanges with various guests as etiquette demands. Eleanor tracks his progress peripherally while maintaining her conversation with Catherine. The waiting game is excruciating but necessary. Any obvious eagerness would be social suicide. Meanwhile, across the room, another drama unfolds. Mrs. Harwick James's mother converses quietly with Eleanor's mother. These two women, ostensibly discussing charitable work, are actually conducting preliminary marriage negotiations disguised as casual conversation. "Your Eleanor has grown into such a lovely young woman," Mrs. Harwick says. "I understand she's quite accomplished in music and languages." "You're too kind," Mrs. Hartley replies. "We've been fortunate in her tutors. Your James has distinguished himself at Oxford, I hear. You must be exceedingly proud." This seemingly innocuous exchange is actually a careful assessment of respective assets. Mrs. Harwick is evaluating Eleanor's accomplishments and connections, while Mrs. Hartley subtly highlights James's education and prospects. Neither mentions money or titles directly. That would be vulgar. But both understand the real conversation concerns whether their families would be advantageously connected through marriage. The fascinating thing about Victorian upper-class marriage arrangements is that they were primarily negotiated between the mothers, not the fathers. Men might discuss settlements and contracts at the final stage, but women identified suitable matches and orchestrated the initial connections long before men became involved. James finally approaches Eleanor and Catherine. "Miss Montgomery, Miss Hartley," he greets them with a small bow. "I hope I find you both well." "Quite well, thank you, Mr. Harwick," Catherine responds. "We were just discussing Miss Hartley's remarkable talent for the pianoforte." "Indeed?" James turns his attention to Eleanor. "I had the pleasure of hearing Miss Hartley play at the Bennets last season. Chopin, was it not? Most expressively rendered." Eleanor's heart races, though her face reveals nothing beyond polite acknowledgement. "You have an excellent memory, Mr. Harwick. For matters of true merit, always." The compliment is delivered with perfect propriety, yet the slight emphasis on true sends a clear message. In a world where direct expression of interest is forbidden, such nuances are everything. Catherine, recognizing her role in this dance, gracefully excuses herself. "I believe my aunt is signalling for me. Please excuse me." Now properly alone, though in full view of the entire room, Eleanor and James can converse more directly, always within the bounds of strict propriety. Every eye in the room observes them, while pretending not to. Every ear strains to catch their words, while feigning disinterest. "Oxford has treated you well, Mr. Harwick?" Eleanor asks, the standard opening for conversation with a young man recently returned from university. "Tolerably so," he replies, "though I found myself increasingly eager to return to London society as the term progressed. Translation, I was thinking about you." Eleanor opens her fan slightly, not fully, which would be flirtatious, but just enough to create a sense of slight privacy. "London has been rather dull in your absence. Few new faces of note." Translation, I noticed you were gone. "I shall be attending the Wilkinsons' dinner tomorrow evening," James mentions, seemingly as a casual aside. "Might I hope to see you there as well?" This is as direct as a Victorian gentleman could be in expressing interest. By informing Eleanor of his attendance at an event she's likely to attend, he's indicating his desire to continue their acquaintance in a socially acceptable manner. "I believe we are expected, yes," Eleanor replies, her gaze modestly directed at her fan rather than his face. "Excellent. Perhaps you might be persuaded to play. I particularly enjoy Beethoven's sonatas." The mention of specific music is significant. He's giving her information to prepare, suggesting future interactions are not merely possible but anticipated. Eleanor allows herself a small smile. "If Lady Wilkinson requests it, I should be happy to oblige." Their conversation continues in this vein superficially about music, literature and recent social events, but actually establishing mutual interest and compatibility through coded language and subtle cues. To the casual observer, they're merely engaging in the conventional pleasantries expected between young people of good breeding. To the trained eye, which includes every woman in the room, they're conducting the Victorian equivalent of passionate flirtation. It was like having two parallel conversations happening simultaneously, the explicit one that anybody could hear, and the implicit one filled with double meanings, references, and body language that only the intended recipient fully understood. Victorian courtship wasn't repressed, it was sublimated into this incredibly complex system of signalling. After precisely the appropriate amount of time, long enough to show particular interest, not so long as to cause gossip, James excuses himself to speak with other guests. This, too, is necessary. Too much focused attention on one young lady would create expectations that could damage her reputation if not quickly followed by formal courtship. As he moves away, Eleanor feels both disappointment and relief. Every interaction is an exhausting performance requiring constant vigilance and calculation. The slightest misstep could ruin everything. Lady Montgomery's sharp eyes have missed nothing. She beckons to her nephew, Lord Pembroke, and speaks quietly. The young man nods and makes his way to Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, might I bring you some refreshment? The lemon cakes are particularly good." This seemingly innocent offer is actually Lady Montgomery's signal of approval. By directing her nephew to show Eleanor attention, she's indicating that Eleanor has passed inspection and is deemed worthy of continued inclusion in their circle. "How kind, Lord Pembroke. A lemon cake would be lovely." As Lord Pembroke fetches the refreshment, Eleanor's mother catches her eye from across the room and gives an almost imperceptible nod. Another successful navigation of treacherous social waters. The tea continues for another hour, a carefully orchestrated performance of refinement and restraint. When the Hartleys finally take their leave, the complex departure ritual begins. Thanks must be expressed to Lady Montgomery in precisely the right terms, warm enough to show appreciation, not effusive enough to seem common. Goodbyes to other guests must acknowledge relative status without being obviously hierarchical. Even the order of departure is significant. Leaving too early suggests the entertainment was insufficient. Too late implies a lack of other social engagements. The Hartleys time their exit perfectly after the Pembrokes, slightly lower status, but before the Harwicks, slightly higher. In the carriage ride home, Eleanor finally allows her rigid posture to relax slightly. Her mother, however, remains alert and evaluative. "You did well with James Harwick," she says, her tone conveying measured approval, though perhaps a touch too responsive to his attention. "Restraint, Eleanor, always restraint." "Yes, mother." Eleanor knows this criticism is actually high praise. Her mother expects perfection and rarely acknowledges when Eleanor merely meets expectations. Lady Montgomery clearly favours the connection. Her instruction to Lord Pembroke was most encouraging. This observation reveals how much information was exchanged in that drawing room beyond actual conversations. Every gesture, seating arrangement, and social courtesy communicated meanings legible only to those fluent in the unwritten language of Victorian society. "The Wilkinsons' dinner tomorrow will be crucial," her mother continues. "James has essentially declared his intention to continue his attentions. We must ensure you appear receptive but not eager." The strategic planning never ends. Every social engagement is a campaign requiring careful preparation and execution. There is no respite from the performance. When they arrive home, Eleanor is physically and mentally exhausted. The emotional labour of maintaining perfect composure while navigating complex social dynamics has drained her completely. Yet she must still dress for dinner and maintain appropriate conversation with her father and brothers. Only in the privacy of her bedroom, with Jane's assistance, can she finally shed the armour of propriety along with her restrictive clothing. "How was Lady Montgomery's tea, miss?" Jane asks as she unfastens Eleanor's dress. Promising, Eleanor replies, too tired for detailed explanation. Mr. Harwick was most attentive. Jane's nimble fingers work at the corset laces. "That's welcome news. He seemed a gentleman of good character when I observed him at the Bennets." This exchange highlights another reality of Victorian upper-class life servants often knew more about their employers' social connections than might be expected. As Jane had accompanied Eleanor to the Bennets musicale, she had formed her own opinions of James Harwick based on his behaviour towards servants, a telling indicator of character invisible to Eleanor herself. As the corset finally releases its grip, Eleanor takes her first deep breath in hours. The relief is exquisite, yet short-lived. Tomorrow brings the Wilkinsons' dinner and another performance on the social stage. "The blue silk for tomorrow, I think," Eleanor says, already planning, "with the pearl hair ornaments." "An excellent choice, miss. Most becoming." Eleanor sits at her dressing table as Jane brushes out her hair 100 strokes as beauty standards dictate. In the mirror, she sees not triumph but exhaustion. The constant performance, the endless calculation, the physical restrictions all take their toll. "Jane," she says suddenly, are you ever grateful not to be born to this life?" The question breaches propriety servants' feelings, are not typically subjects for discussion, but Eleanor is too tired to maintain barriers. Jane's hands pause briefly in their brushing. "Each position has its burdens, miss." A diplomatic answer that reveals nothing yet acknowledges the truth neither woman is truly free, merely constrained in different ways. The cage may be gilded for Eleanor and iron for Jane, but both are cages nonetheless. I sometimes wonder what it would be like, Eleanor continues, her voice soft, to simply say what one means, to act without calculating every consequence. A dangerous luxury, I imagine, Jane replies, resuming her brushing. For women especially, this shared moment of honesty rare between mistress and servant reveals the fundamental truth of Victorian womanhood across class boundaries. Their lives are defined by constraint, performance, and the careful navigation of rules created by and benefiting men. The social dance continues tomorrow with new figures and formations, but the same underlying rhythm. Eleanor will don her costume, memorize her steps, and perform her role with perfect precision because the alternative social death is unthinkable. As Jane finishes with her hair, Eleanor dismisses her for the evening. "Thank you, Jane. That will be all." Alone at last, Eleanor sits on the edge of her bed, no longer the perfect Victorian young lady, simply a tired young woman contemplating her future. If all goes well with James Harwick, she will exchange her father's house for her husband's, one set of constraints for another. Is this what she wants? The question itself is almost meaningless. Want has little place in the equation of her life. Security, position, family alliance, these are the relevant factors. Her mother would be horrified at the very notion of considering personal preference in a matter as serious as marriage. Yet, as Eleanor prepares for bed, she allows herself a small, private smile. James Harwick had noticed her playing Chopin. He had remembered, and something in his eyes when he spoke of seeing her tomorrow suggested a person, not merely a suitable match. Perhaps within the elaborate constraints of Victorian propriety, something genuine might still be possible. Not freedom as we would understand it today, but moments of connection despite the performance. Eleanor slips between cool sheets, her body grateful for release from whalebone and tight lacing. Tomorrow's performance awaits, with higher stakes and greater scrutiny. But tonight, in the sanctuary of her bedroom, she can briefly remove the mask and simply breathe. Outside her window, London continues its nocturnal life. In drawing rooms across Mayfair and Belgravia, similar scenes unfold: women calculating advantages, men establishing connections, servants observing and assisting, the great machine of Victorian society grinding forward. The rules remain invisible but absolute. The performance never truly ends, and morning will bring yet another opportunity to rise or fall in society's estimation, depending on how skillfully one plays the game. The Wilkinsons' townhouse blazes with light, every window a gleaming rectangle against the London night. Carriages line the street outside, disgorging finely dressed passengers into the cool evening air. It's 7 o'clock precisely. Fashionably late would be considered insulting for a dinner invitation. Inside, the atmosphere crackles with anticipation, not just because of the Hartley-Harwick potential match that has set tongues wagging across Mayfair, but because dinner parties were the ultimate showcase of Victorian social standing. Every element from the guest list to the table settings would be scrutinised and remembered. The Hartley family and Miss Eleanor Hartley, the butler announces as Eleanor and her parents enter the gleaming entrance hall. Eleanor's stomach clenches despite her outward composure. Her blue silk gown rustles softly as she hands her wrap to a waiting footman. The pearl ornaments in her carefully arranged hair catch the light from the crystal chandeliers. Months of planning and social manoeuvring have led to this evening. "My dear Mrs Hartley, how delightful," Lady Wilkinson gushes, air-kissing their hostess, and Miss Eleanor, looking positively radiant. The Wilkinsons stand just inside the drawing room, performing the ritual receiving line that begins every formal dinner. Behind them, the room is already filled with guests engaged in the pre-dinner mingling essential to establishing the evening's social dynamics. Eleanor scans the crowd while appearing not to. James Harwick is already present, deep in conversation with Lord Montgomery near the fireplace. Their eyes meet briefly across the room, and he offers an almost imperceptible nod. The gesture sends a tiny thrill through her despite its restraint, or perhaps because of it. I attended a historically accurate Victorian dinner recreation at a museum in London. The curator told me they had to train the actors for months just to master the eye contact rules. Too direct was inappropriate, too evasive seemed shifty. There was literally a proper way to look at someone without seeming to look at them. Miss Hartley, a voice interrupts her thoughts. A pleasure to see you again so soon. Eleanor turns to find Lord Pembroke, Lady Montgomery's nephew from yesterday's tea. His presence suggests Lady Montgomery's continued approval of Eleanor's social trajectory. Lord Pembroke, she acknowledges with a small curtsy. I trust Lady Montgomery is well this evening? Quite well, though regrettably unable to attend. A slight headache. The subtext is clear. Lady Montgomery's absence is not a social snub to the Wilkinsons, but merely a health concern. Please convey my sympathies when next you see her. This exchange, utterly mundane on the surface, reinforces Eleanor's connection to Lady Montgomery's influential circle. Every conversation at these gatherings serves multiple purposes, social positioning being chief among them. Across the room, Charlotte Wilson has also arrived with her husband and daughter. Though the Wilsons occupy a lower social tier than the Hartleys, their inclusion in this dinner demonstrates the complex ecosystem of Victorian society. Not all guests were equals, but each served a purpose in the social tableau. Charlotte catches Eleanor's eye and offers a respectful nod, acknowledging their relative positions while subtly reminding Eleanor of their chance meeting. The middle-class woman is playing her limited cards skillfully. Meanwhile, below stairs, the real engine of the evening's performance roars at full throttle. The Wilkinsons' kitchen is a scene of controlled chaos. Their cook red-faced and shouting orchestrates an elaborate ballet of dishes and servers. Footmen stand at attention, waiting to carry silver trays upstairs. Kitchen maids scurry between workstations, adding final garnishes and wiping stray sauce drops from plate rims. If that soufflé falls, girl, you'll be out on the street before midnight, the cook bellows at a trembling assistant. The threat isn't idle. A ruined dish at an important dinner could indeed cost a servant their position. Victorian employers expected perfection and dispensed with those who failed to provide it. Jane, temporarily loaned to the Wilkinsons' staff for the evening, a common practice for large events, helps arrange delicate floral decorations on dessert plates. Though not directly involved with Eleanor this evening, her presence below stairs gives her access to servant gossip that might benefit her mistress later. I heard the Harwick boys been asking about Miss Hartley for months, a Wilkinson housemaid whispers as they work side by side. His valet says he kept her dance card from the Bennets' ball. Jane files this information away while keeping her expression neutral. Is that so? How interesting. These servant information networks operated beneath the glittering social surface like underground rivers, carrying currents of intelligence invisible to those above. Back in the drawing room, a subtle shift occurs as Mr. Wilkinson checks his pocket watch and nods to the butler. The dinner hour has arrived. The butler approaches James Harwick and murmurs something in his ear. James straightens his already impeccable evening attire and makes his way toward Eleanor. "Miss Hartley," he says with a formal bow, "may I have the honour of escorting you into dinner?" This is not a casual request. The dinner escort pairings were carefully predetermined by the hosts, with significant social implications. By assigning James to escort Eleanor, the Wilkinsons are publicly acknowledging and supporting their potential connection. "Thank you, Mr. Howick," Eleanor replies, placing her gloved hand lightly on his offered arm. "You're most kind." As the assembled guests process into the dining room in their assigned pairs, a clear hierarchy emerges. The hostess, escorted by the highest-ranking male guest, leads the procession. The host, escorting the highest-ranking female guest, enters last. Between them, couples are arranged in descending order of social importance. The Wilkinsons' dining room presents a breathtaking display of Victorian opulence. The long mahogany table gleams with polish, set with damask linens, sterling silver, and fine china. Elaborate candelabras and fresh flower arrangements create a tableau of luxury intended to impress. You have no idea how insanely specific Victorian table settings were. I've seen original dinner planning diagrams where footmen had to place each fork precisely 1 inch from the next. All spoons had to align perfectly, and wine glasses had to form an exact diagonal line. One misplaced utensil could ruin a hostess's reputation. Each place setting contains an intimidating array of specialized cutlery and glassware, at least 5 forks, multiple spoons, several knives, and 3 or more glasses. For the middle-class guests like the Wilsons, this presents a potential minefield. Using the wrong implement at the wrong time would instantly mark one as socially inferior. Charlotte Wilson surveys the place settings with carefully concealed anxiety. Though she understands the basic rules work from the outside in, fish fork for fish course, soup spoon for soup, the more obscure implements like asparagus tongs or grape scissors present terrifying possibilities for error. James seats Eleanor with practiced grace before taking his own chair beside her. The seating arrangement is another calculated element of the evening. Husbands and wives are never seated together, and the most socially compatible guests are positioned to encourage stimulating conversation. "I understand you're quite the horsewoman, Miss Hartley," James says, as the first Corsair clear soupies served by silent, white-gloved footmen. "I enjoy riding when weather permits," Eleanor responds, carefully lifting her soup spoon in the correct manner, dipping away from oneself, sipping from the side rather than the tip. Their conversation remains superficially about horses and country pursuits, but the subtext explores compatibility and shared interests. Around them, similar conversations bloom and fade, each guest performing their social role with varying degrees of skill. The dinner itself is a marathon, not a sprint. 10 or more courses will be served over several hours, each with its specific rituals and requirements. Soup gives way to fish, then to a meat course, game course, roast, and various entremets before concluding with dessert, fruit, and nuts. Between courses, conversation must flow without interruption while appearing effortless. Certain topics are strictly forbidden: illness, money, politics in mixed company, religion, and anything that might cause strong emotion. This leaves a narrow band of acceptable subjects. Literature, nothing controversial. Music, art, travel, and carefully sanitized social gossip. Charlotte Wilson, seated between a baronet and a retired colonel, navigates these constraints with determination if not natural ease. Her daughter Emily, at her first adult dinner party, watches her mother for cues while attempting to engage with her dinner partner, an elderly gentleman with limited conversational range. "Do you find London agreeable this season, Sir Arthur?" Charlotte asks, defaulting to the safest possible opening. "Tolerable, Mrs. Wilson, tolerable, though the fog last Tuesday was most disagreeable for my constitution." Charlotte suppresses a wince. Health topics border on improper and smoothly redirects. "Indeed, I found the National Gallery's new exhibition quite reviving that very day. Have you had occasion to visit?" This skillful pivot demonstrates Charlotte's social competence despite her middle-class background. She may lack aristocratic ease, but she's mastered the fundamental rules. Eleanor, meanwhile, finds herself in the evening's most enviable position. James Harwick proves an attentive dinner partner, balancing proper formality with genuine interest. Their conversation moves from horses to literature to music with surprising fluidity. "I've been reading Mr. Dickens' latest," James mentions as the fish course appears. His social observations are remarkably acute, though perhaps occasionally overwrought. "I found his characterizations quite moving," Eleanor replies, gauging his response. "A man's literary opinions often revealed his political leanings, which in turn suggested his attitudes toward women's roles. As did I," James admits, surprising her with his candour, "though I would not confess as much in my university circle, where emotional response to literature is considered rather unfashionable." This small confidence, admitting to unfashionable sensitivity, creates a moment of authentic connection amid the performance. Eleanor feels a flush of genuine pleasure distinct from social satisfaction. Below stairs, the kitchen machinery operates at full capacity. Each course must be perfectly timed, served hot or cold as appropriate, and presented with flawless elegance. The servants themselves have a strict hierarchy mirroring that above the butler supervises footmen, the housekeeper oversees maids, and the cook reigns supreme over kitchen staff. Jane helps prepare finger bowls for the fruit course, listening as the Wilkinsons' Ladys Maid shares intel about their mistress's future social plans. This information will prove useful when advising Eleanor about appropriate attire for upcoming events. "They're saying Mr. Harwick's quite taken with your Miss Hartley," the lady's maid comments. "His valet says he's been impossible to please since returning from Oxford, sending back his cravats 3 times for retying and fussing endlessly about his evening attire." "Miss Hartley finds him agreeable," Jane replies noncommittally, though she stores this promising information. Servants knew that romance was brewing long before formal announcements, based on their intimate knowledge of their employer's habits and behaviours. A gentleman suddenly concerned with his appearance, or a lady spending extra time selecting gowns, often signalled growing attachment before the parties themselves fully acknowledged it. As the elaborate meal progresses, subtle power shifts occur around the table. Mrs. Hartley exchanges meaningful glances with Mrs. Harwick, their earlier tentative alliance strengthening as they observe their children's evident compatibility. Lord Montgomery monopolises the host's attention, with business talk, subtly establishing his dominance in that sphere. Even the middle-class Wilsons find opportunities for small social victories. When the conversation turns to recent musical performances, Emily Wilson's piano skills are mentioned favourably by Lady Pembroke, significant acknowledgement from an aristocratic source. The dessert course arrives a spectacular construction of spun sugar, moulded ice creams and decorative fruits that elicits appropriate murmurs of admiration. This final culinary performance represents the culmination of the kitchen staff's efforts and the hostess's planning. "How exquisite, Lady Wilkinson," Mrs. Hartley comments. "Your chef has quite outdone himself." The compliment, though seemingly about food, actually acknowledges the Wilkinsons' social achievement in presenting such an impressive dinner. In Victorian society, even praise was coded and layered with meaning. After dessert comes the evening's most significant gender ritual. Lady Wilkinson catches the eye of the highest-ranking woman present and gives an almost imperceptible nod. In response, the woman rises, signalling all other ladies to do the same. "Shall we leave the gentlemen to their port?" she suggests, though it's not actually a question. The women process out of the dining room in the same order they entered, returning to the drawing room for coffee and gossip, while the men remain behind for stronger drinks, tobacco, and more direct conversation. This segregation, lasting approximately half an hour, was an inviolable Victorian tradition. In the drawing room, the women rearranged themselves into conversational clusters no longer constrained by dinner seating. This is when the evening's real female-centred social work occurs. Alliances are formed, information exchanged, and reputations subtly shaped. Mrs Harwick approaches Eleanor with deliberate casualness. "My dear Miss Hartley, you must tell me about your charitable work. James mentioned you have an interest in children's education." This direct engagement from James's mother signals serious interest. By referencing a previous conversation between Eleanor and James, she acknowledges their developing connection while assessing Eleanor's suitability as a potential daughter-in-law. "Indeed, Mrs Harwick, the Sunday school at St Mary's has been my particular focus these past 2 years." The conversation that follows is nominally about charity work, but actually allows Mrs Harwick to evaluate Eleanor's character, values, and social graces outside the structured dinner setting. Eleanor, understanding perfectly what's happening, presents her best self while maintaining appropriate modesty. Meanwhile, Charlotte Wilson seizes a rare opportunity to speak directly with Mrs Hartley, leveraging their brief market encounter. "Such a pleasure to see you again, Mrs Hartley. I hope you found everything you required at Covent Garden yesterday." The reference to their previous meeting establishes connection, while the question is safely inconsequential. Mrs Hartley, mindful of Lord Montgomery's earlier comments about Charlotte's husband's legal assistance to her brother, responds with controlled warmth. "Indeed, Mrs Wilson, most satisfactory. I understand your daughter plays the pianoforte quite admirably." This small acknowledgement, though far from an invitation to intimacy, represents significant social currency for Charlotte. Being recognised by Mrs Hartley elevates her status among the other middle-class women present. In the dining room, the men have rearranged themselves for port and cigars. With ladies absent, conversation turns to previously forbidden topics: politics, business, and more direct social assessments. "Harwick," Lord Montgomery addresses James's father, "that son of yours seems quite taken with Hartley's girl. The bluntness would be shocking in mixed company, but is acceptable in this male enclave." Mr Harwick swirls his port thoughtfully. "She comes from good stock. Hartley's finances are sound, family connections respectable. The girl herself seems properly brought up." This cold-blooded evaluation of Eleanor's merits would horrify Victorian sensibilities if spoken before ladies, yet represents the practical reality underlying romantic attachments. Marriage was fundamentally a business arrangement, particularly in upper-class circles. James, sitting nearby, maintains a neutral expression despite his discomfort with this assessment of Eleanor as breeding stock. His own feelings are more complex than social and financial calculations, though he would never admit as much to these men. Thomas Wilson, Charlotte's husband, remains quiet during this exchange. Though present, he occupies a lower social tier and knows better than to insert himself into aristocratic marriage discussions. Instead, he converses with a neighbouring gentleman about less consequential matters, gathering useful business intelligence while appearing merely sociable. After the prescribed interval, the host rises. "Shall we join the ladies, gentlemen?" The men process to the drawing room where the evening's final phase begins. Now comes the entertainment portion: music, card games, or perhaps charades for less formal gatherings. These activities provide structured opportunities for continued social interaction while showcasing accomplishments. "Miss Hartley has promised us a musical performance," Lady Wilkinson announces once the groups have reintegrated. Miss Wilson will kindly turn the pages. This pairing is significant. It places Eleanor in the spotlight while giving Emily Wilson proximity to the evening's social centre. Both young women benefit, though in different ways, reflecting their different stations. Eleanor moves to the pianoforte with practised grace. The instrument itself is a status symbol for the Wilkinsons, an expensive Broadwood grand positioned to display their wealth and cultural refinement. I've actually played a restored Victorian Broadwood piano at a historical museum. The action was so much heavier than modern pianos you had to really work your fingers. Victorian women developed serious finger strength just to appear delicately musical. As Eleanor begins to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the piece James had mentioned preferring, the room falls appropriately silent. Her performance is technically proficient, though not brilliant. The point isn't virtuosity, but demonstrating proper feminine accomplishment and the family's investment in her education. James watches with evident appreciation. Though Victorian propriety prevents him from showing excessive emotion, his focused attention speaks volumes in a society where subtle signals carry enormous weight. When Eleanor finishes, the applause is appropriately restrained. Enthusiastic approval would be vulgar. Lady Wilkinson suggests others might perform, maintaining the evening's momentum while distributing social opportunities. As the hour grows later, guests begin departing in an order as carefully choreographed as their arrival. Those of lower status leave first, while the most distinguished guests remain longest. Their extended presence honours the hosts. Charlotte and Thomas Wilson make their farewells relatively early, having achieved their social objectives for the evening. Emily has performed adequately on the pianoforte. Charlotte has reinforced her connection to Mrs Hartley, and Thomas has secured a promising business introduction. Eleanor and her parents remain until nearly midnight, their later departure confirming their higher social position. When they finally take their leave, James personally escorts Eleanor to the entrance hall, another significant public gesture. "Your performance was magnificent, Miss Hartley," he says, as a footman retrieves her wrap. "Beethoven himself would have been charmed." "You're too kind, Mr. Harwick," she responds, though her eyes convey more than her words. "Perhaps I might call on you tomorrow afternoon. I believe your mother mentioned receiving visitors between 3 and 5. The request properly directed through reference to her mother rather than to Eleanor directly represents a definitive step toward formal courtship. A gentleman didn't request a specific calling time unless his intentions were serious. I believe we shall be at home, Eleanor confirms, her composed exterior masking inner exhilaration. As the Hartleys' carriage pulls away from the Wilkinsons' townhouse, the evening's complex social performance concludes. For Eleanor, the night has been an unqualified success. James's attention, Mrs. Harwick's assessment, and her well-received musical performance all indicate upward social momentum. Yet beneath the satisfaction lies exhaustion, the constant vigilance required to navigate Victorian social waters. Monitoring every word, gesture, and facial expression exacts a heavy toll. Even success feels somewhat hollow when it's achieved through such elaborate performance rather than authentic connection. Across London, similar scenes unfold as other dinner parties conclude. Servants clear away the elaborate settings while their employers assess social victories and defeats. Everyone, regardless of class, has been performing their prescribed roles in the great theatre of Victorian society. In the Hartleys' carriage, Eleanor allows herself to lean back against the cushioned seat, momentarily abandoning perfect posture. Tomorrow brings James's call and the next phase of their carefully orchestrated courtship. The social dance continues, its patterns predetermined, yet its outcome still uncertain. As midnight settles over London, the social performances of the Victorian day gradually wind down. Gas lamps cast pools of yellow light on empty streets where carriages no longer rattle. Behind brick facades and closed curtains, the day's final rituals begin each class, following their own prescribed patterns for the night hours. The Hartleys' carriage pulls up to their Mayfair home, where lights still burn despite the late hour. Servants don't rest until their employers do. The butler opens the door, the footman helps them down, and the machinery of service continues its relentless motion. A most successful evening, Mrs Hartley pronounces as they enter the warmth of their home. Her voice holds the quiet satisfaction of a general whose battle strategy has played out perfectly. Indeed, her husband agrees, handing his hat and gloves to the waiting butler. Young Harwick seems quite taken with Eleanor. His father spoke highly of her. Eleanor says nothing, knowing her parents will dissect the evening's social victories without requiring her input. Her role was to perform well. Theirs is to analyse the results and plan next steps. This too is part of the invisible choreography of Victorian family life. The house is hushed but not silent. Despite the late hour, servants move quietly through hallways and service stairs, preparing the family's nighttime rituals. The evening shift of a wealthy Victorian household staff had endless tasks turning down beds, heating water for washing, preparing hot drinks and laying out nightclothes, all while remaining as invisible as possible. I once interviewed a curator who devoted her career to studying Victorian night rituals. She told me aristocratic homes functioned like hospitals. Someone was always awake, always working, and the patients, the family, were never left unattended. It was an exhausting system designed purely to demonstrate that you could afford to exhaust people. In her bedroom, Eleanor finds Jane waiting to help her undress. The lady's maid looks tired. She's been up since before dawn and will work until Eleanor is ready for sleep, but her movements remain efficient and careful. Mr. Harwick will call tomorrow afternoon. Eleanor says quietly as Jane begins unfastening the seemingly endless row of buttons down her back. "That's excellent news, miss." Jane's fingers work deftly despite her fatigue. Lady Wilkinson's maid mentioned he declined 2 other invitations to attend tonight's dinner. This servant intelligence confirms what Eleanor already suspects. James's interest is genuine, not merely the product of their parents' social engineering. Layer by layer, Eleanor sheds the physical restrictions of her public self. First the dress, then the petticoats, the corset, and finally the chemise, until she stands in only her thin cotton nightgown. The transformation is both physical and psychological. With each removed garment, she becomes less the perfect Victorian young lady and more simply herself. "Would you like hot chocolate tonight, miss?" Jane asks, gathering the discarded clothing. "Yes, please." And Jane. Eleanor hesitates, then continues. "Thank you for everything today." The acknowledgement crosses the invisible boundary between mistress and servant, a small recognition of Jane's humanity beyond her function. Jane's expression softens momentarily before she resumes her professional demeanour. "Of course, miss, I'll return shortly with your chocolate." Alone, Eleanor moves to her dressing table and begins removing the pearl ornaments from her hair. The face in the mirror looks younger without the social mask she wears all day, less the poised society debutante, more a 21-year-old woman with hopes and uncertainties. Tonight represents a turning point. James Harwick's formal call tomorrow signals serious intentions. If all proceeds as expected, their courtship will advance toward engagement within months. The life she's been trained for since birth, marriage, motherhood, social management approaches with increasing speed. Across town, in their more modest Bloomsbury home, the Wilson family has also returned from the evening's social engagement. Their arrival lacks the ceremonial quality of the Hartleys. No line of servants awaits them, only Martha, their maid-of-all-work, who looks dead on her feet after an 18-hour day. "I'll see to the fire in your bedroom, ma'am," Martha says, taking Charlotte's wrap. "Thank you, Martha, and then you may retire. We can manage ourselves." This consideration for the servant's exhaustion reflects Charlotte's background. Unlike aristocrats who expect constant attendance, the middle class must balance service expectations with practical limitations. Thomas Wilson removes his own coat and loosens his collar with evident relief. The performance of middle-class respectability weighs as heavily as aristocratic perfection, perhaps more so for being an aspiration rather than a birthright. "You played well tonight, Emily," he tells his daughter. Lady Pembroke's compliment was quite significant. Emily beams at this rare praise. "Do you really think so, father? I was terribly nervous." "Indeed, and your mother's conversation with Mrs Hartley did not go unnoticed. A valuable connection. This family discussion of social strategy would shock aristocrats who consider such explicit acknowledgement of social manoeuvring vulgar. The middle class, however, must be more conscious and deliberate in their status-building efforts." Charlotte moves to the sideboard and pours her husband a modest glass of whisky, another difference from aristocratic households where servants would perform this task. Robert Henderson seemed quite attentive to Emily. His father's shipping business is doing exceptionally well. The implications are clear. While Emily lacks Eleanor's prospects, Robert Henderson represents a solid match that would maintain or slightly improve the family's social position. In the middle-class marriage market, dramatic upward mobility is rare. Security and modest advancement are the realistic goals. As the Wilsons prepare for bed with Martha's limited assistance, their nighttime rituals mirror aristocratic ones in purpose, if not in elaboration. Charlotte's hair is brushed out, though she counts no specific number of strokes. Thomas reviews business papers before retiring, though not in a dedicated study with brandy and cigars. Emily practices her scales one final time, reinforcing the accomplishments that constitute her marriage currency. Martha, meanwhile, climbs the narrow back stairs to her small attic room, too exhausted to even remove her dress before collapsing onto her thin mattress. Unlike Jane, who still has duties to perform for Eleanor, Martha's day finally ends, though she'll rise again at 5 to start the household fires and begin breakfast preparations. Back in Mayfair, Jane returns to Eleanor's room with a silver tray bearing hot chocolate in fine porcelain. This nighttime drink, served in aristocratic bedrooms across London, marks the final service ritual of the day. Jane helps Eleanor into bed, plumps her pillows, and places the tray across her lap, treating her mistress almost like a child despite their similar ages. "Will there be anything else tonight, miss?" "No, thank you, Jane. Get some rest yourself." Jane curtsies before leaving, though she's far from finished with her own work. Eleanor's blue dress must be brushed and properly stored, her accessories catalogued and put away, her shoes cleaned and set out for the next day. Service continues long after the served have retired. And here's something that would blow your mind. Victorian ladies' maids often slept on small trundle beds or pallets in dressing rooms connected to their mistresses' bedrooms. That meant they were essentially on call 24/7. If the lady woke at 3 a.m. wanting something, she just had to call out. In the servants' quarters below stairs, the Hartleys' household staff finally gathers for their own late supper. The kitchen, quiet after the day's cooking frenzy, becomes briefly their domain. Footmen loosen their livery collars, housemaids remove their caps, and for a few precious moments they shed the invisible weight of perfect service. "Mr. Harwick's calling tomorrow. Jane announces as she joins them, having completed Eleanor's immediate needs, formally between 3 and 5. This information electrifies the small gathering. Servants invest emotionally in their employers' social successes, partly because it reflects well on their own service and partly because it provides vicarious participation in a world they can observe but never join. "Did you see how he watched her at the pianoforte?" one of the footmen asks, breaking into a rare smile. "Like a man dying of thirst eyeing a water pump." "His valet says he's been impossible since Oxford," the cook adds, serving Jane a plate of cold meat and bread, changing his clothes 3 times before dinner and fussing over cufflinks like they're crown jewels. These observations, gathered through the vast servant intelligence network, paint a more human picture of James Harwick than Eleanor herself has access to. The aristocracy's rigid social rules prevent direct expression of feeling, but servants observe the unguarded moments that reveal genuine emotion. "They'll make a handsome couple," Mrs. Phillips, the housekeeper, says with unusual sentimentality. And Mr. Harwick's staff speak well of him, not one for unnecessary criticism or cruelty. This assessment matters more than the family realises. A master's treatment of servants reveals his true character better than any social performance. The staff's approval of James bodes well for Eleanor's future happiness in ways her parents would never think to investigate. As the servants finish their meal and prepare for their own brief rest, the conversation shifts to practical matters: tomorrow's menu, the laundry schedule, an upcoming dinner party. Their lives continue in parallel to their employers, equally bound by rules but with far higher stakes for breaking them. Across London, in a cramped lodging house near the docks, another nighttime scene unfolds, this one far removed from Mayfair's comforts. Here, a former lady's maid named Sarah sits by a guttering candle, counting the meagre coins that represent her day's earnings as a seamstress. Sarah once served in a house like the Hartleys until a moment's indiscretion with a footman resulted in her dismissal without reference. Without the all-important character reference from her previous employer, she could never return to service. Now she survives on piecework sewing, her fingers raw and her eyes failing from endless tiny stitches in poor light. Her fate represents the precarious reality beneath Victorian society's elegant surface. For women especially, one misstep could mean permanent exclusion from respectable employment. The same society that fetishized female purity offered few paths to redemption for those who transgressed its boundaries. I found these heartbreaking letters from dismissed servants begging former employers for references. One woman wrote that she hadn't eaten in 3 days and was considering throwing herself in the Thames. The lady of the house wrote "impertinent request" on the letter and filed it away. The brutality beneath the politeness was staggering. Sarah's nighttime ritual bears little resemblance to Eleanor's or even Martha's. No hot drink awaits her, no turned-down bed. She simply removes her shawl, lies fully clothed on her narrow cot, and blows out the precious candle. Tomorrow brings more of the same endless work for insufficient pay. The constant spectre of hunger and homelessness if her health or eyesight fails. This, too, is Victorian England, the shadow reality that makes the glittering social world possible. For every elegantly dressed lady, dozens of seamstresses work 14-hour days. For every elaborate dinner party, kitchen staff labour from dawn until midnight. The invisible foundation of suffering beneath the visible display of wealth. Yet even at society's lowest levels, rules govern behaviour. Sarah maintains certain standards. Her room is painfully clean, her clothes mended with expert precision, her speech free from coarseness. Having fallen from respectability, she clings to its outward forms as proof that she still belongs to the world she lost. Meanwhile, in his bachelor lodgings near St James's, James Harwick prepares for sleep with his valet's assistants. Unlike ladies, Victorian gentlemen had relatively simple nighttime rituals, removing day clothes, washing minimally, donning nightshirts, perhaps reading or writing briefly before retiring. "Will you be calling on Miss Hartley tomorrow, sir?" his valet asks as he hangs James's evening coat. "Yes, Parker, see that my morning coat is pressed, will you, and the navy waistcoat." "Very good, sir." This exchange, seemingly about clothing, actually communicates James's serious intentions. The specified garments represent formal daytime wear appropriate for a significant social call, not the casual attire of routine visits. The valet understands immediately what this means. Alone in his bedroom, James retrieves a small book from his desk drawer, a volume of Tennyson's poetry. Between its pages lies a dance card from the Bennets' musicale last season, Eleanor's name neatly penned beside two dances. He's kept it for months, though Victorian propriety would deem such sentimentality embarrassingly unmasculine. This private moment reveals what public performance conceals genuine attachment beneath social calculation. Though raised to view marriage as a practical alliance between suitable families, James finds himself drawn to Eleanor for less quantifiable reasons. Her musical sensitivity, her quick intelligence visible beneath appropriate feminine modesty, her occasional flashes of subtle humour, these qualities appeal to him beyond her social credentials. Of course, he would never articulate these feelings so directly, even to himself. Victorian emotional language, particularly for men, lacked vocabulary for such nuanced attraction, but the carefully preserved dance card speaks volumes that social convention silences. As London's clocks strike 1, the city's nighttime transformation continues. Gas lamps are extinguished, shop doors locked, streets emptied except for police constables on their beats and the desperate or dangerous who inhabit the night hours. Behind countless windows, candles and lamps are snuffed one by one. Eleanor finishes her hot chocolate and sets the tray aside. The warmth of the drink and the day's emotional exertion combine to create pleasant drowsiness. Tomorrow brings James's formal call and the next phase of their developing connection. For now, sleep beckons, a brief respite from social performance. In their own bedrooms, Charlotte and Thomas Wilson review the evening's successes and plan tomorrow's strategies. Their social advancement requires more conscious effort than the aristocracy's, but tonight they've made measurable progress. Emily's musical performance earned genuine approval, and Charlotte's connection to Mrs Hartley, however tenuous, represents valuable social currency. Below stairs, in attics and servants' quarters across London, the invisible army that maintains Victorian society snatches brief hours of rest before tomorrow's labours begin. Their beds are hard, their rooms cold, their futures uncertain, yet they've carved out small spaces of humanity within the rigid structures that confine them. Even Sarah, the fallen lady's maid, finds momentary peace in sleep, the one state that equalises duchess and seamstress, master and servant. For a few hours, Victorian society's elaborate hierarchies dissolve into shared human vulnerability. This cycle of performance and rest, public rigidity and private release continues day after day, year after year, building the elaborate social edifice we now call Victorian society. Each person, regardless of class, plays their assigned role in a vast production they neither created nor can escape. Yet within these seemingly unbending structures, genuine connections sometimes form. Eleanor and James's developing attachment, though shaped by social rules, contains seeds of authentic feeling. Jane's brief acknowledgement of Eleanor as a person, not merely a mistress, creates a momentary bridge across class boundaries. Even Charlotte's strategic social manoeuvring stems from genuine desire to secure her daughter's future happiness. The invisible rules that govern Victorian life, elaborate, arbitrary, often cruel, nevertheless provide the framework within which people navigate their deepest human needs for connection, security, and meaning. The social dance, for all its artificial steps, still allows human hearts to find their natural rhythm if they listen carefully enough. As night deepens toward dawn, London sleeps or pretends to. Tomorrow the performance begins again, with new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities for rising or falling in society's estimation. The rules remain unchanged, the stakes eternally high, the consequences of failure potentially devastating. But tonight, in the brief interval between social obligations, even the most proper Victorian can set aside their public mask and simply breathe. Eleanor drifts towards sleep, her mind filled with anticipation of tomorrow's visit. Charlotte reviews household accounts in her dreams, calculating social advantages along with financial ones. Jane's exhausted body finally relaxes after 18 hours of service. The social dance pauses, the music temporarily silenced. Morning will bring new figures, new formations, new combinations of partners, but the fundamental patterns remain unchanged. This is the reality of Victorian England rigid structures, paradoxically creating space for human stories to unfold in all their complex, contradictory glory. And as you lie in your comfortable bed, free from whalebone and strict social rules, think how fortunate you are to observe this elaborate dance from a safe distance. No corseted breathing, no constant fear of social missteps, no 18-hour workdays. Your body relaxes deeper into your mattress, soft and yielding in a way Victorian beds never were. Your breathing slows, your mind drifts pleasantly between past and present, and the weight of invisible rules gradually lifts as sleep approaches. The Victorian social dance continues in your imagination, but you're free to leave the ballroom whenever you choose, a luxury Eleanor, Jane, and Charlotte never enjoyed. As you drift towards sleep, carried on gentle historical currents, remember that while we may romanticize the elegance of the Victorian era, its beauty came at a cost few of us would willingly pay today. Rest now, comfortable in your freedom from the invisible cage that both protected and imprisoned the Victorians. Their elaborate social rituals make fascinating stories but exhausting realities. As sleep embraces you, be grateful for the simple gift they never had, the liberty to be imperfect, unobserved, and entirely yourself.